Welcome to day 3 of the Wealth series. This is part of a 30-day wealth session, and my intention over the next 30 days is to share with you some of the wealth principles and strategies that have helped me redesign my financial life. My outcome from today is simply to empower you with enough information so that you can start making remarkable changes in your financial life. Now, we started 2 days ago. Day 1, we talked about the foundation to wealth, and I am going to start by recapping on what we've covered in the last 2 sessions. I believe that if you're joining for the first time, it will be useful to know where in the journey you are. Now, 2 days ago, I started by sharing with you some of my thoughts and some of my ideas and my philosophies about wealth. I began by saying that wealth is not simply material wealth. The wealth comes in 3 levels: spiritual wealth, which is the highest level of wealth; mental wealth, which is the second level of wealth; and then physical wealth, which is the lowest level of wealth. And the physical level of wealth is expressed in various forms and ways, one of which is health. Now, you've heard people say health is wealth, and that there is some truth in that statement. But also, the physical level of wealth is expressed through what we call material wealth. Material wealth that leads to financial freedom and prosperity in the material form. Now, I concluded the first session by saying you need to have all 3 levels of wealth present in order for you to really have what we call a holistic wealth, a complete wealth. Now, when you have all 3 levels present, we call that prosperity. So, for those who may think that wealth is simply about money, that assumption is not incorrect, it's just incomplete. Now, I started yesterday's session by talking about the journey towards creating financial freedom and wealth. But before I did, I shared that there was a formula for wealth. I shared that formula with you on day 1. And I used my past as a reference. I said, a number of years ago, I was one of those people who, when I earned, the first thing that I did was spend. And after I had spent, then I saved. I gave you a formula that said that for so many years, one of the things that I did was, when I earned, the first thing I would do would be to spend. And when I was done spending, I would save. This is the formula for poverty. This formula kept me in lack. And part of the reason I lived in this way was because I operated from a place of ignorance. And I didn't have enough financial understanding and financial awareness. And it wasn't until I hit rock bottom, falling into debt, having more money going out every month than I had coming in, that I sat down and I started to study wealth. You see, one of the best ways to have a really remarkable life is simply your decision to study how things work. Life is first a study, then it becomes a design, then it becomes a practice, and then a lifestyle. But if you want to be successful, study success. If you want to be wealthy, study wealth. If you want to be happy, study happiness. If you want to be a business person, study business. In every area of life that you have a desire to excel in, discipline yourself to begin by study. Now, I started to study a lot of successful people, and I realized and I learned that amongst all of their lives, there was a consistency in how they lived. So I started to study their beliefs. I started to study their character, their habits, and their lifestyle. And I came to a conclusion. Number 1, they were not very different from me. They're not even very different from you. And I postulated in my mind that if I could replicate their habits, the decisions they made, their lifestyle, that I could achieve something similar to what they had achieved. Now, the last few years have proven that assumption to have been correct. But before I was able to transform and change my past, I needed financial education. And that is what this session is all about. One of my outcomes is always to increase your level of understanding, because understanding creates changes. King Solomon is noted to be, and have been, the wealthiest king and the wealthiest person who ever lived. But also he's called the wisest person who ever lived. And he said something that I find very fascinating. He said, in all you're getting, get understanding. Now he says wisdom is the principal thing, but get understanding. Now in the next few hours, I'm going to hopefully try and increase your level of understanding. But in changing my life and in changing my experiences, I had to go from this formula to a different lifestyle, which was, I decided that when I earned, the money was still the same, no difference. I decided the first thing that I would do would be to invest, because this was what the wealthy people that I studied did. After investing, I decided now I could spend. But even when I spent with a plan. Some call it a budget. The B word. Some say that the B word is restrictive. I disagree with that statement. Your budget, if you have a vision, if you have a purpose, your budget is simply a plan to get you to your vision in the shortest possible time. And so when I spent with a budget in mind. Therefore, I created what's called a surplus. And that surplus allowed me to reinvest. Now, this is the equation for wealth. In other words, it has less to do with what you earn. It has everything to do with what you do after you've earned. In other words, it's how much you spend, but also how much you keep. Now, this keeping is not about saving. It's about investing. Remember that. For many years, I spent first before I saved. Now, because I had such a poor financial understanding, I always spent more than I earned. So I was always in debt. So I had nothing to save. And a lot of people remain in lack because when they're done spending, they have very little left. And so they have to save actively for the long term. Saving is a road plan or roadmap to poverty. You cannot save your way to wealth. You can't. And the reason is simply because your inflation in London today is 2.9. If you were to compare that with 2008, in 2008 inflation was 2. A big difference. Now let's round up that 2.9 down to 3, just so I can show you why saving is really not a very smart idea. Now there's a principle called the rule of 72. The rule of 72 states that if you want to find out how quickly your money will double if you invest it, you simply divide 72 by what you get in terms of interest. So for example, if you invested in a great investment scheme that you were going to get, in this instance, a 12% return. Now, according to the rule of 72, 72 divided by 12 would mean that in 6 years, your money would double in value. The rule of 72 can also be used to find out how quickly your money can decline by half its value. To do that, you simply take 72, you divide by the interest rate. In 2008, it was 2, meaning that it would have taken 36 months for your money to reduce in purchasing power by half its value. Today, assuming 3, it would take 24 months. So, the more you save, the more the purchasing power of your currency or your money declines. But think about this. My bank pays 0.025% for keeping my money, which is an indication that they don't want your money. Now compare 0.025 against 2.9%. You can't save your way to wealth. If you save, you increase your wealth incrementally. If you invest smartly, wisely, you increase your wealth exponentially. And so today, what I'm going to be sharing with you is how you take that step towards creating wealth. Now, at the end of yesterday's session, I concluded what I called a journey. I started yesterday by talking about 3 important parts of the journey to wealth. I said we're going to start the wealth journey based on the principle that just like life is a journey, wealth creation and your journey to financial freedom can be viewed in the same way. And I said you must start with your location, but you must also have an idea about your destination, and you need a map to get you from where you are to where you want to be. And yesterday we focused on understanding where you were. Now, if you weren't part of yesterday's session, my recommendation is after this session, take some time and listen back to yesterday's session. I think you'll find it very informative. In yesterday's session, we focused on understanding 2 things: your net worth and your wealth worth. And from yesterday's session, I concluded that your net worth is less important in defining your financial future than your wealth worth. As a matter of fact, it's possible to have a high net worth, but also be financially dependent. And that's simply because net worth that cannot be converted and that will not be converted to income or cash flow doesn't help with your financial problems. You will always have expenses. We will always have expenses. But if we have no income, then that means we'll always be dependent. We have to work for money. So yesterday I said, the wealthy do not work for money. They have money work for them. To understand the principle better, I started by saying that there were 2 ways of making money. The first is whereby you have money as the master and you have to work as the slave or servant for money. This is where you work for a job. You have to trade your time, energy, intelligence, presence, efforts to make money. In this instance, money is the master, you're the servant. Now, I did this for so long, and about 96% of the population do this. This is how we've been trained. Go to school and get a job. Work for someone else. Invest your time. Now, the second way is where you have money as the servant and you as the master. This is how wealth is created. You make money work for you, and you do this using various available options. One of the most important is leverage. You take a portion of what you have. Now remember the equation I gave you. You earn, you invest before you spend. Now how do you get here? You take a portion of what you earn, you invest it. You invest in a good investment that pays a great return. You reinvest the interest generated. The more you do that with time, you develop and grow this into a point whereby it can start creating a lot of income that far exceeds your expenses. And therefore now money can be working for you, and then you can stop slaving for money. I explained yesterday that your wealth ratio tells you when you become financially free. Now that's all I'm going to talk about in relation to yesterday and 2 days ago. I want to talk about today because I'm excited about what I want to share with you today. Like I said, if you weren't with us yesterday, it's important you go back and you listen to the first two sessions, because what you find, some of the ideas there will start to provide you with a level of inspiration and education primarily that can change your life. Now, I love what Steve Jobs said. He says, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect the dots looking backwards. Now, you have an opportunity right there. Yesterday, 2 days ago. Now, before I begin today's session, I want to ask that you do two things for me. Number one, I want you to call 2 people. Send a tweet, send a message to 2 people and say, Mensah has just started today's session and he's talking about wealth. And I think you should be part of it. Now, the second thing I want you to do is I want you to get a journal. Get your journal, get your pen. The reason for that is because you're going to be capturing some ideas. Not ideas based on what I share, but ideas based on some of the thoughts that come through your mind. Now, if you don't have a journal and if you don't have a pen, that's okay. You know, you can always go back and rewatch this at a later date. So I want you to be relaxed and I want you to just go with the flow. More importantly, I want you to come with a positive mental attitude and come with an openness in your heart to listen to what I have to share. You'll find it to be quite interesting. Now, in today's session, we're going to be dealing with your financial vision. In other words, we're dealing with the destination where you want to get to. It's really going to be a goal-setting seminar today. It's going to be a goal-setting session. In other words, we want to know how we can get to where you want to get to. And that begins with questions. Now, the great writer says, without vision and dreams, my people perish. In other words, you've got to have a dream. You've got to have a vision. You know, Martin Luther King said, I have a dream. And it was one dream that he had. He shared that dream with the world, and millions of people said, I want to be part of that dream. That's the power of a dream. You need a vision. You need a vision of your financial future. You have an idea about where you are. Okay, where do you want to get to? Now, the starting point, I should say, begins with your ability to simply dream, fantasize, create. Now, for some of you watching, I don't know where you're watching from, I believe just like me, there's a part of you whereby you don't think you can become financially free. You don't believe you can become wealthy. You don't believe that you can achieve everything that you want. Now, you want it, but there's a part of you that doesn't believe it. That's okay. Just stay with me. What you find is over the next few days, a lot of those doubts, we're going to displace those doubts with faith. But more importantly, we're going to displace those doubts because we're going to recreate a new image of yourself. Now, if you want to change anything, you don't change old habits by trying to fix old habits. If you want to create a change in your life, what you do is you create new habits. New habits that cause the old habits to become obsolete. New habits that displace the old habits through a principle called the law of displacement, the law of substitution. Now think about this. If you walk into a room and it's dark, assuming in this case that the blinds are shut and there's no natural light into the room and it's pitch black, how do you get the darkness to leave? Very simple. You hit the light switch. The light displaces the darkness. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to create new habits for you, a new vision that would displace any old belief, limitation, or doubt that you might have. Now, in this session, I'm going to use myself as a reference point. I use myself as a reference point because this is going to be a practical session. We're going to be dealing with numbers. So I'm going to show you how I started to create changes through my vision. Now, one of the biggest problems that I found is that most people are trying to play the game of money, but they're playing the game in such a way that they're destined to lose. Why? Because they're not making the game winnable. It's not about how well you play. It's about the results. And I found for so many years, I made it difficult for myself. And I'll explain how I did this. Now, the first thing you need is a vision. I'm going to split this board into two parts. In this section, I'm going to say you start with a vision. You start by deciding what you want. And once you know what you want, once you have a picture of what you want as a vision or a dream, you must crystallize that vision in written form. A dream that is not in written form is simply a wish. You must take that dream, convert that dream into written form, and whilst you're doing that, you convert that dream into what we call a goal, or what we call an outcome. Once you have your goal written down, you must assign a timeline for its achievement. You see, without a timeline, a deadline for accomplishing a goal, you cannot push yourself into the state of wishful thinking. You need to have a timeline. You need to have an idea, because the mind is very precise in what it can do, similar to the brain. You must tell it what you want and when you want it. Now, once you have your goal, the next thing you must do is convert this goal into what we call a plan. A plan. Once you have your plan, you convert the plan into what we call a strategy. From the strategy, you develop what we call daily habits. And every day, you simply have to execute the habits. That is how success is achieved. For a long time, what I did is I had my sights set on my vision. It was somewhere in the future. And I found for a long time, I couldn't move forward. The way I changed my life was I took it one day at a time. Your habits are how you execute your strategy. Your strategy is how you execute your plan. Your plan is how you achieve your goal. Your goal is how you fulfill your vision. And your vision is part of your purpose in life. It's a step-by-step process. Life is hidden in a day. So if you can successfully design one day and repeat that day, what you have is a great life. Many people are trying to create the future without realizing that the future is today. So you have to begin with the end in mind, bring that picture into the present, and do daily and consistently what will lead you to that future. Now, in beginning with your vision, we start by saying we're looking for abundance, prosperity, good fortune, health, success, wealth. That is the picture of what you want. Now, from that vision, we need a goal. Now, when I started my journey, the first question I asked myself was, what do I need to become financially free? Now, that's the question I want to ask you. How would you know when you're financially free? How much money would you need to become financially free? You see, without a number, all you're doing is just running around and doing what we call figure eights. You see, most people are too busy trying to earn a living that they haven't sat down and asked themselves, what do I really want? You've got to design your life. Now, when I asked myself that question, I said, I don't know. Many of you might say, I don't know. So let me show you how you can do this. Now, in yesterday's session, we went through your financial statements. One aspect of your financial statement we looked at was your expenses. We said your expenses identify your financial destiny. We all have expenses. You need to maintain a lifestyle. There is a standard of living that you want for yourself. And so, from yesterday's session, I said that you have what we call wealth ratio. And your wealth ratio is simply income over expenses. However, the income is not income from all sources. It has to be income from investments only. Not a job, income from investments only. Wealth is simply a product of having enough income from your investments that far exceed your expenses, or that can cover your chosen lifestyle. You're financially free when you don't have to work as a result of having a continuous and constant inflow of income from various investment sources that far exceed your expenses. And therefore, you don't have to work because you have to or out of necessity, but you can choose to work because you want to, maybe for passion, maybe for purpose, maybe for significance, maybe for fulfillment, maybe just to be happy. But you're working because you want to. When you've arrived at that place, we say you're financially free. That's what we're trying to establish. How do we get you financially free? Now, to get to that point, what we begin with is what we call your wealth ratio. If this ratio is equal to or greater than 1, we say you're financially free. So the starting point is your expenses. How much do you need every month to maintain the lifestyle that you want? The number is 1. The greater the number, the more comfortable you can be. When I started this journey, the first thing that I did was I decided what my income had to be. This income, I realized, had to come from investment sources. So this is how you begin the journey of setting your vision and your goal. I had expenses. At the time, my expenses was $3,500. But I obviously wanted to have enough contingency to ensure that I could maintain a certain level of lifestyle in case I had emergencies, I had family issues I had to deal with. So what I did was I added to these expenses what I call my financial goal. I made this number £4,000. This became what I called my desired annual income. This was the income I had to generate, which was $7,500. I had to generate $7,500 per month from my investments. So on an annual basis, multiplying 7.5 by 12 meant that I needed to earn £90,000 from my investments. This was income, but it wasn't my goal. Now, I know you might be thinking, that's the goal. That was not the goal. The goal was much bigger than this. You see, this has to come continuously and consistently from investment sources. So, in order to have an income of £90,000, I obviously had to build my investment portfolio from nothing, which is what I had. Actually, I had less than nothing, but I had to build it up from what I had, which was nothing, all the way up to a level of capital in such a way that if I invested that capital in an investment vehicle, that would pay me £90,000. So what we're dealing with here now is, this is what I call the eggs. What I needed was a golden goose that could lay eggs. Now, each of these eggs each year was going to be £90,000. Now, for the purpose of this assessment, we're going to just discount taxation and all the payments and disbursements you might have. We're going to keep it simple. Therefore, what I had as my vision and my goal was this number here. The goose, the golden goose that laid the eggs. Not the eggs. The eggs was £90,000. But what was the goose? The goose is the goal. To understand and calculate what this number had to be, I had to make some assumptions. The first assumption I made is I said, if I were to be smart enough to have found a great investment vehicle that paid 10% return assuming 10% return that paid me 90,000 per year, then I would have needed 90,000 divided by 10%. This is 900,000. I'll say that again so you understand. The income every year had to be £90,000, assuming that I was generating that income from an investment stream that paid a 10% annual return. So every year I had 10% return from this investment vehicle as a result of my capital. All I had to do is divide the 90,000 by the rate of return, which is 10%. That gives you £900,000. So £900,000 was the goal. I then said, well, let's assume that maybe I may not get 10%. If this was 8%, then £90,000 divided by 8% was 1.125 million. So, in other words, I needed £90,000, but to guarantee that I had £90,000, I would have had to have built my capital base from nothing all the way up to between 900,000 and 1.125 million, and I would have had to make sure that I had an investment that was paying a minimum of 8%, preferably 10% or more. That was the goal. Now, as you can imagine, being in debt, having nothing, having no investments, the numbers seem very far-fetched. For a lot of people, it will seem far-fetched. Now, for you watching, it might seem far-fetched, but this number is achievable. I'm going to show you how. Remember when I started, I said that the first thing you need, when I drew some information on this side of the board, I said the first thing that you needed was a vision. I said you need a vision. I said then you must convert the vision into a goal. Now we've established the goal, but the next thing I said was that you must have a timeline. You must have a timeline associated with that goal. My vision was based on a 10-year timeline. And that is what I'm going to use as a basis for trying to get you financially free. 10 years was what I set for myself. But to achieve 1.125 million, which was the higher number, within 10 years was almost impossible for me. I want to show you why it's important to know what the timeline is. Many of you watching, I don't know where I found you, I don't know where you're watching from, you might think that to be perhaps unrealistic. It is realistic. There's no such thing as an unrealistic goal. You simply have unrealistic deadlines. If you earn £2,000 per month, £2,000 per month, and you decide to invest 10% of what you earn, which is £200, if you put this £200 in an investment vehicle that pays an annual return of 10%, and that is compounded, and you do that every month, in 40 years, you would have approximately 1 million, approximately. But in 47 years, you will have approximately 1.2 million. So to achieve the 1.125 million that I talked about is achievable in roughly 50 years, there or thereabouts. But 50 years wasn't what I needed. Actually, if I had developed this for 50 years and I kept this in a 10% return at the end of 50 years, this 1.2 million will pay me 120,000 per month, which is equivalent to £10,000. So 120,000 pounds per year, which is equivalent to £10,000 per month. So this dream is achievable, but it would take 50 years. When I didn't have 50 years to wait. You see, one of the biggest misnomers that we have about wealth and becoming financially free is that you have to work until you're 65 to achieve financial freedom. That is wrong. That is wrong. Age, time has nothing to do with wealth. Wisdom is what decides your wealth. I'm going to say that again. Time is not in the wealth equation. Time doesn't decide when you become wealthy. Wisdom does. I could have waited 50 years to achieve my goal, but I decided that I wanted that goal badly. So I went back to the drawing board. I knew that I couldn't achieve 1.125 million in 10 years. It wasn't possible. I wasn't even earning that much. I went back to the formula that I had. My expenses plus my goal would give me my income, my desired annual income. My expenses was £3,500. I decided to eliminate this extra goal I had for contingency. See, when I did this at £7,500, which is the income divided by my expenses, this would have given me a wealth ratio greater than 2. That gave me some certainty that if something were to happen, that I had more than enough to cover myself and my family. But that is the mistake. You see, I set the game in such a way that I couldn't win. I had to change something. You either change your wants or you change yourself. You can't have both. Sacrifice comes before the reward. In the late 1900s, there was a man called H.L. Hunt. He was the wealthiest man at the time, and he was asked a question. The question was simply, what are the keys to success? And he said that the keys to success are very few. He said, as a matter of fact, there are just 3 keys to success. Number 1, he said, decide what you want. Number 2, he said, determine the price you're going to have to pay for what you want. Number 3, he said, pay the price. If you don't pay the price, you don't deserve the promise. You see, a lot of people want to be wealthy. A lot of people want to be healthy. A lot of people want to be successful, but they don't want to pay the price. And in the success equation, subtraction always comes first before multiplication. You must let go of something you have of value in order to get something of greater perceived value. And once you've let go of what's in your hand, you must wait. What you do in between both seasons decides the amount of harvest you have. There's a promise that comes with success and wealth, but there is a price. You must pay the price in full. You must pay the price in advance. If you pay the price, you achieve the promise. And the price is due every day. No one owns success. We lease success. Every day we have to pay the price. So I went back to the drawing board and I said, what sacrifice am I willing to make? I said, fine. I don't have to be wealthy on a wealth ratio of 2. It was making the dream impossible. I eliminated this goal, and therefore I said my desired annual income has to be 3,500 only, because that would cover my expenses and that would give me a wealth ratio of 1. I would be financially free. I wouldn't have a lot of contingency, but I would be free. £3,500 per month across 12 months meant that I needed £42,000 from the investment. Applying the same principle we talked about, 10% return meant that I needed £420,000 at 10%. At 8%, I needed £520,000. Roughly. This was much less than the £900,000 or the 1.125 million that I had initially. I was now making the game more winnable. However, £520,000, I couldn't do that within 10 years. So I went back to the drawing board. And here is the point. To become financially free is really easy. And the reason is simply because it depends on your lifestyle. It depends on your way of living. It has less to do with what you earn. It has more to do with how you live, the decisions you make, the actions you take. But I went back to the drawing board and I said to myself, this is more achievable than the first, However, I can't do this in 10 years. Remember, I was still in debt. I had just started my financial education and financial journey. I had to make the game winnable. And here is my advice to you. Make the game winnable for yourself. You know, don't choose a financial goal based on what people think. Change your lifestyle and you change your future. I realized that all I needed, if I really wanted to be financially free, was to be able to maintain my basic necessities and some entertainment. For example, in going back, I said to myself, how can I reduce this 3.5 thousand? Remember, there's a price to be paid. There's a sacrifice that has to be made. And I'm going to talk about this later on, but I'll share something with you right now. And this is what I want to say. Reasons make the difference in whether you become financially free and wealthy. In other words, what's your why? If I sat with you and I was going to spend, say, 10-15 minutes with you, all I would be interested in is understanding your why in life. What's your purpose? Because if I know your reasons, I can predict your future. Reasons always come first. You see, your why makes the how and the what easier to achieve. I had a why. You see, I had fallen down to rock bottom and I hated where I was. I hated where I was so badly that I couldn't stay there. Now, we do things generally for two reasons. One, to avoid pain or to pursue pleasure. And pain can be a great source of inspiration and motivation. And I use the pain that I found myself in as a way of inspiring me to make the sacrifices. So I went back to the drawing board and I said, if my wealth depends on my lifestyle, then I've got to go through my expenses and understand how I spend my money. Now, when we talked yesterday, I made reference to the importance of identifying and itemizing your expenses. This is simply because, from my experience, your expenses will always fall under two categories: what we call needs, what we call wants. Needs and wants. Your needs and necessities, what you need: shelter, food, the basic things you need to survive. Your wants, I found in my case, were not all necessary. I made a decision that I would keep all my needs, but in looking at my wants, I said, what can I eliminate? But I found that my wants fell into two categories again: luxury wants and necessity wants. In other words, I found that I had a lot of wants that were liabilities. The cars, the accessories, the lifestyle choices I made, the partying heavily, spending money I didn't even have. But those were luxury lifestyles because I was trying to keep up with the Joneses. I was trying to fit into the group and you know, have other people esteem me. Something had to give. I made a decision that my necessity wants were important. Some of them, not all. For example, the wants of spending money on my personal development and education is a necessity. It's a want. I was going to keep that. Expenses relating to perhaps spending time traveling to see friends or family, spending time with loved ones, maybe going out to a restaurant regularly. Not every day, maybe once every month. So rather once every week. I was going to keep those because they help me stay alive. You know, a lot of people think that wealth and creating wealth means you sacrifice everything that you have and all that you are. I don't think it's the truth in my experience. But you must discipline yourself to keep the essential things that you need to maintain the lifestyle that you want. But I eliminated a lot of my luxury items. I said to myself, delay gratification so that you can become financially free. In doing that, I took my expenses down from 3,500 down to 2,500. Now this became a lot more achievable. Now 2,500 per month meant that in a year I needed £30,000. If I invested this in 10% return, I needed £300,000. If it was 8%, then I would have needed £380,000 approximately. That became my target, my goal. And that is how I started to then focus on financial opportunities and strategies to achieve that. So for you, what I want to say to you is sit down and determine your goal. Determine that number. Now this simply meant that from where I was, I had to build my portfolio all the way up to 380,000 in such a way that if I invested in an investment stream that paid between 8 and 10%, I was guaranteed £30,000 per year. This would have meant that I would have had a wealth ratio of 1 and I would have been financially free. It's really that simple. There's nothing complicated about it. The next step in this process is then to determine what investment vehicles are necessary to get you there. And that's where we talk about plan. Again, we go back to the symbol I had here before. I said vision, goal, timeline, then plan. Now this £380,000 I could achieve within 10 years because I had sat down and I had studied myself and I had studied opportunities and I had come up with a plan that could get me there. Wealth, investing, is all about the plan. It's not about the investment vehicle. It's not about the investment option. It's not stocks, it's not bonds, it's not property, it's not real estate, it's not gold, it's not oil. It's the plan. What is your plan? Write the vision. Make it plain. What is your plan? The plan makes the investment vehicle successful. However, the plan is dependent on the investor. So, the lowest common denominator in all of the equation underneath the plan is the big word, you. You make the investment work. My decision at that point in time was I was going to focus on increasing my financial education first. You see, motivation is important. Inspiration is important. But if you don't combine motivation with education, then what you have is someone who is motivated, but he could be ignorant. Now, if you reverse the equation, if you have someone who is educated but not motivated and will not do anything, what you have is what we call an educated derelict. You need a combination of both if you're going to achieve your dreams. But the first thing I had to do with myself was I had to educate myself. So I decided that I would spend time studying. That is when I started to study investment options and principles and strategies. But more importantly, I started to study myself. And I found when studying myself that I had a potential that was unlimited. And I had limited my potential for so long because of the self-image I had about myself. I always believed that I was always going to be poor. I had to change the picture I had about me. In order to change the result externally, I had to change myself. And that is what you have to do. There are two parts to the education process. If you want to be wealthy, you must study opportunities, you must increase your financial education, but simultaneously you must study yourself and you must continue to renew your mind. You must continue to renew that image you have about yourself. Paint a new picture of who you want to be. Let it be beautiful, let it be grand. And what you find is that once you fix that image in your mind, and once you believe that it can happen, what you find is that your attitude begins to change. And as your attitude changes, your results will change. Now, we've established the goal, but I want to do something here for you. I feel a deep level of responsibility towards you that I'm not just going to move on to the next stage, which is the plan. I want to take you through what I call a goal setting process. It's going to be quick, but it's very powerful. It's a 10-step process. Now, I don't have to go through all of the 10 steps, but I want to share some of the key parts of the process with you. It's not just about knowing what the goal is, and then you set off on a journey to find it. You've got to sit down. You've got to think. Now, the goal setting process starts with, number one, decide what you want. Now, we've established that already. You now know what you want. Now, once you have an idea about what that number is, you must have it in writing. Write it down. Get a journal. Document your goals and vision in writing. Give it permanence in written form. Crystallize those ideas in written form. And what you find is when you write down your goals, it becomes clearer. As a matter of fact, the more you write it down, the more you start to see ways and methods through which you can attract it into your life. But also, sometimes when you write your goal down, you find out that there's some changes that might be needed. So the first thing you want to do is decide what you want. And then write it down. Very simple. Now, in your case, for me, I had 10 years as my timeline. In this session, I'm hoping that you're going to adopt the same timeline or less. Because if you can achieve financial freedom quicker, I don't see why you shouldn't. But you've got to be careful not to set the boundaries so close. And I'll talk about that shortly. But the second thing you must do once you've written it down is you must then stop and ask yourself, why don't I have it? Why am I not financially free? Because if you're not financially free today, there's a reason. There is a reason. And in many cases, you see, many of us are trying to learn new strategies. We're trying to learn new ways, new principles. But we simply have to just stop and ask ourselves, what am I doing wrong? You see, if you want to make a great dish, a great meal, one of the requirements is that you have to include all of the right ingredients. And more importantly, you have to keep out the wrong ingredients. You can cook a great meal, beautiful meal, and at the very last minute, let's say you put in a wrong ingredient and it changes the outcome of the entire meal. So life gives us history for a reason. And one of the things I've discovered is that we don't learn from history. But the reason we have history and we have people who have achieved so much is because we can use them as examples. But also, just as we have successful people, we also have people who have failed. And I would say, if you focus on doing what the successful people do, you increase your probability of becoming successful. But it's not guaranteed, because you could be self-sabotaging yourself by putting something in the last minute. But I believe if you can study the failures and discipline yourself not to do what they do, you increase the probability of becoming successful. At least you go above average. You see, the race of life is not really that complicated. If you get to the top, you find out that the top is really empty. The bottom is overcrowded. The bottom, we have a lot of people simply conforming to other people's way of life. And so we have a lot of similarity in what people are achieving in results. If you want to create a breakthrough, all you have to do is discipline yourself, study successful people, study failures, do what the successful people are doing, avoid what the failures are doing. So I take you back to the question, why don't you have what you want? If you're not financially free today, if you're not wealthy, there's a reason. So sit down and ask yourself, what is the reason? Now, this is not so that you can pass blame. You remember what I said to you at the start of this session? 2 days ago, I said that I always used to blame other people. It was the government, it was taxes, it was the leaders, it was the company, it was bad luck, it was the continent, it was just destiny. I never looked at myself. You've got to be responsible. you must be accountable. And that means you must ask yourself, why don't I have what I want? If I have a desire, why don't I have it? Now, what you find in doing this is that you might identify that as a time factor. For example, maybe you have a family, you work long hours, that you don't have time to study when you get back home. You might find that it's an ability factor, meaning you lack wisdom. There is no need trying the principles I'm going to be sharing with you in the next few sessions if you lack wisdom. It could also be that you lack the drive, you lack the will, or maybe it's just simply because you don't want it badly enough. Now, here is the point I'm trying to make with this example. If you don't want it badly enough, you're going to compromise on your standards. You see, there's a few steps you must take. You must begin with commitment, but you must be consistent. Between commitment and consistency, there are some steps you must follow. Through commitment, you begin the journey. Through consistency, you achieve the results. But you will need dedication, hard work, persistence, sacrifice, determination, because along the journey, it's going to be hard. Anyone who says creating wealth is easy, perhaps is making that statement from a very personal point of view. It's simple, but it's not easy. It's subjectively simple, obviously. Some might say it's subjectively easy, but here is the point. You're going to have to sacrifice something. Now, the third question you want to ask yourself once you've done this is ask yourself a simple question. What sacrifices am I going to have to make? And here is two I can give you from experience. You're going to have to sacrifice who you are today or who you want to become. You know, the butterfly has to die to its old self in order to become something of a much higher person or thing. You have a caterpillar has to die to become a butterfly. You're going to have to give up your old self to become the best you. And that giving up of your old self is the toughest part. Letting go of associations and friends that perhaps don't support that new you. Letting go of some of your old beliefs. Now, a lot of you listening, for example, have a problem with what I'm sharing with you because, and I had this for so long, we're all conditioned. We have beliefs, we have philosophies, but we are controlled by our paradigms, which is simply our habits, which is our conditioning. And so for some people, what you find is when you begin this journey, your conditioning is holding you back from breaking out to that life that you deserve. What are you going to be willing to give up for what you want? Number 4, how can you achieve it? I'll show you how, but ask yourself the question. You see, to achieve any goal, you must know what you want. You must know when you want it. In this case, we're saying 10 years or less. But you must have an idea about how you can achieve it. Now, part of that idea is not simply because it might be completely correct. It's simply that you have to be aware. Now, the biggest mistake that most people make, and I'm going to recommend you don't do the same whilst you're listening to me, is simply accept other people's opinions. Now, everything I'm sharing with you, I said this yesterday, I want you to accept it, not so that you can implement it, accept it so that it can sit there in your mind, and I want you to test it. Don't accept everything I say and then apply it. Accept the information so that you can test it. Check it out with other ideas that you've heard, and then when you make a decision, let the decision be based on you, not based on what I've suggested. Now, you'll find as we go through the investment sessions in this series, I'm going to share what I did, but I'm never going to tell you what to do. Because what works for me may not work for you. I have a different passion that you may not have. Now, Warren Buffett said something that I like very much. He says, never invest in something that you don't want to know a lot about. In other words, never invest in something that you don't have a passion or an interest in. So the first thing I want you to understand is, I'm going to share ideas. There are other people who have great ideas, but don't accept everything we have and apply it. accept it, and then test it. Test it in thinking, test it with questions before you apply. Now, how are you going to achieve this goal? You need to have an idea about what you have to do. There are two ways. Do you need to earn more money? Do you need to get more smarter in defending what you've created already? Number 5, what obstacles are you going to face along the journey? Now, this is just some basic questions. And what you find is that for many of you listening, you're probably thinking, can we skip this section and move to the next? Let's get down to the action. But I found these are the questions that really helped me achieve financial freedom. Someone has said that thinking is the highest activity that we're all capable of doing. The problem is, very few of us actually sit down and think. Now, I believe that the average person doesn't think more than 5 minutes every day. 5 is very generous. If you were being very, if I was being very honest, I think the average person doesn't think by more than 3 minutes. I never used to think. I used to react to life. I never sat down and thought. And this is the point. You have to become great at responding to life rather than reacting. Now, when you react, you're thinking with emotions. When you respond, you're thinking from your emotions. And the key here is this. To react means you haven't planned. When you respond, it's a sign of planning. It's a sign that you've sat down and you've pondered. And one of your higher faculties is something I talked about in the first session. Reason. The reason part of your higher faculty helps you to think. So you have to sit down and think and ask yourself, what are the obstacles that I might face? If you've ever seen a 4 by 100 meter hurdle, you have the contestants running and they have obstacles in front of them. As they run, as they approach the obstacles, they have to adjust their speed, timing, so that they can successfully navigate and jump over the obstacles so they can continue running. The problem is many of us are running that race of life, and unfortunately, because we haven't planned and not expecting obstacles, whenever we run into an obstacle, we get hurt and we never continue the race. So we pull to the sideline and we stay there for life. We have an experience that is hurtful and we say we can't do this. I just can't do this. It's not for me. I'm never going to be good. I'm not a good runner. I'm not a good sprinter. I can't jump. Of course you can jump. You can do anything you want. But you didn't plan for it. Now, the 6th thing you want to write down, and I think this is powerful. When you've identified the obstacles, you already know how you're going to try and do it. Is you've got to sit down and ask yourself, when do I want to achieve it? Now, I've talked about 10 years. That is my goal for you.